Magic.me is the world's greatest school for magic, meditation, and mysticism. You can learn everything there, from chaos magic to hermeticism to meditation to how to supercharge your finances and take absolute control of your destiny. In short, you get all of the tools you need to turn chaos into beautiful, scintillating order and master your life. It's incredible. You've probably heard me talk about it on the show quite a lot. But check it out. It's growing fast. And I just want to say, if you're confused about where to start, because I have so many courses there, the Adept Initiative is the place to go. The Adept Initiative is the flagship course on Magic.me, and it contains everything you need to know to master the most profound ancient techniques of changing your consciousness and the most modern and cutting-edge tools and systems for absolutely turning your life into a masterpiece. You're really going to dig it. Go check it out, and I will see you in class. It's magic.me, magick.me. Yes, hello. Welcome back to the Ultraculture podcast. Our guest today is long in coming. We're talking to the charismatic frontman Alexis Mincolla of the band 3TEETH, who has been very active over the last few years and has toured with Tool and Primus and engaged in an Operation Mindfuck across the entire planet. Super interesting guy. Here's his bio. Here's what he has to say about himself. Iconoclastic 3TEETH frontman Alexis Mincolla is dedicated to exploring the relationship between archetypes, mythologies, history, and the hypocrisy of the human experience. He says, "I'm constantly dissecting the space between chaos and order in the eternal psychic battle between forces with opposing beliefs and perspectives that I like to call the cosmic taint." Well, with a bio like that, there's not much else to say other than a super nice and interesting guy. He's obviously very into magic, and we talk about that quite a lot in this episode. We talk about dealing with an increasingly hypnotized and conformist world. I mean, increasingly to say the very least. And the role of the artist, the role of the magician, the shaman in navigating sleeping human consciousness in such a situation. And how to put out agitprop to shake people a little bit, a topic that I think is more relevant than ever. And we also talk about a fairly sensitive and controversial topic, to say the very least, which is guns. Yes, Alexis is super into guns. You can see it on his Instagram page. And I am too, quite honestly, which I've kind of mentioned in passing in previous podcasts. I don't make a big public deal out of it, but it's something that my mind has changed about in the last few years, and that's something we explore in this episode. So listen with an open mind. I think that if you're outside of America, you may look on to the fondness of Americans' fondness for guns with horror, perhaps, or maybe envy, depending on who you are. If you're in America, you very likely have an extremely strong opinion on the subject. So all I ask is that you listen with an open mind and perhaps set aside preconditions and prejudices and judgments, at least for the length of the episode, and then you can, maybe check in with yourself and how you're thinking about it afterwards. But just listen with an open mind. You are listening to two, very conscious and conscientious individuals talk about, a culture and a topic that they are exploring with magical consciousness and from unexpected perspectives. So I think this conversation will hopefully offer something valuable to that debate. If you're in America, whether you are pro or against, you can't ignore the fact that gun ownership went through the roof during the COVID period. There's different stats from different places, but I just checked a New York Times article, and I think the latest stats is that 39% of all American households own at least one gun. Most of those households own several guns. There are actually more guns in America than people, and that number's up from 32% in 2016. That is a massive increase during the 2020 to 21 period alone. 21 million Americans bought guns in 2020, and that is a 60% increase in sales over the prior year. And that is not slowing down at all. People are going crazy. So you may be totally against this, or you may be one of those millions of people who is a gun owner. This is a topic that is not going to go away. It'll be with us for, the rest of our lives. So something to maybe look at or reconsider with an open and conscious mind. Americans have been hoarding guns like toilet paper, and depending on who you are, you may consider this a terrifying sign of an impending apocalypse or a new civil war, or maybe you think this is actually a good thing. This is a sign of Americans from all walks of the political spectrum, because those are not all red state purchases. Quite a lot of them are blue states, quite a lot, perhaps the majority actually. Maybe this is a sign of Americans realizing that actually all of their freedoms are important and the Second Amendment exists for a reason. Maybe you yourself have had a moment of reconsideration on this topic, or maybe not, but a lot of people are. That's for sure. The other thing is gun ownership is changing in America. It's classically been stereotyped as kind of red state rednecks who are hoarding all these, massive arsenals. That's certainly not the case. People from all walks of life are new gun owners or prior gun owners, all races, all genders, all sexual orientations. And I think if there's one thing that we talk about in this conversation is how this topic has a very, paradoxical tendency to bring people together across cultural divides, where in theory people are kind of buying guns because they're scared of each other, but then they have something in common to talk about. So I think that's worth commenting on and quite interesting. As I said to Alexis on Instagram chat after we had this podcast conversation, maybe fear of each other will bring us all together. So that's one of the many topics we talk about in this podcast. Listen with an open mind. And this is a hard topic to not have a strong opinion about, but I think it's a very worthwhile conversation that we had. Okay, a note of apology. The audio on this conversation is not the best. It is completely my fault. We did this on Zoom, and as we all know by now, Zoom often does not provide the best audio quality. My mic was, the settings on my mic were off, and I didn't realize that while we were having the conversation, in addition to the usual Zoom clipping and dropped out things. Hopefully not a huge deal, but I take this stuff pretty seriously, and this is frankly a little bit embarrassing, particularly because I'm interviewing a professional musician. So Lilac Studios, where I do this podcast, is growing. I'm addressing this issue because actually my mic gain has been improperly set on previous episodes as well. I've just ordered a new hardware preamp to drive my mic more appropriately. And it's a learning process, and it is embarrassing that even after 5 years of doing this podcast, I can have the occasional slip up on audio. But believe you me, this is a topic of unbelievable obsession for me. So we will return to good audio as quickly as I can muster. So hopefully everything's okay, though. It only affects my side, and so Alexis sounds great. And I did everything I could to repair the audio. So hopefully it's okay, and it's certainly intelligible and you can hear everyone. Other than the fact that the other thing about Zoom is when both people are talking, it kind of goes crazy. So hopefully the good outshines the technical difficulties on this one, and please accept my apologies on that, but I've smoothed it out as best as I can. All right. So without any further ado, please enjoy this interview with Alexis Mincolla. Hello, welcome to the show. How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you for having me, Jason. I'm glad we can finally do this. I feel like we've been flirting online for a little bit of time, so it's nice to cut the foreplay out and get to the conversation.
Yeah, and by flirting, you just mean like talking about like doing gun talk, comparing guns.
Exactly. Talking about gun stuff, which is basically like the highest form of dude flirting.
it kind of is. Well, I have a theory about dudes, right? Which is that, most dudes are like obsessively detail oriented and techie, and like every dude has their own thing. Like it could be like
Yes,
sports trivia, it could be comic books, it could be music gear, it could be guns, it could
absolutely.
be whatever. So but if you get two guys who are into the same like techie thing, they just start talking robot language at each other, and like everyone else is like, what the hell are you talking
Exactly.
about?
And
It's
like
very
the
satisfying.
dopamine just goes off the
Yeah.
charts. They're just super excited about it. And they just like get lost in this sort of, a time warp of excitement.
Right. No, totally. It's like it's a hilarious phenomenon. So but why don't we before we get into that and alienate everybody, um what why don't
Entirely.
just start off why you want to start off just giving people a little bit of background on your work and your projects and who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my name's Alexis Mincolla. I'm the front man of a project, a band called 3TEETH, which I guess it's a band. The idea was always to kind of build an art project on the chassis of a band, because my background before being in the band was more visual arts and graphic arts and being an art director, and even did a tour of duty in the advertising world. So probably why I decided to start a band would be to atone for my sins of the advertising world,
But what did
and
you not to interrupt, but what
hopefully
did you do
maybe
in advertising? Because I did the same thing. That's interesting.
I actually started as a copywriter, and then sort of by virtue of working with enough art directors, I sort of segued into like stealing their skill set and then becoming an art director and then eventually a creative director, and kind of started my own little boutique agency, and eventually said, you know what, this is not the mark I want to leave on the world, and which is why I kind of used that skill set to, I guess, approach creating more subversive forms of art, to, I guess, undo some of the vibes that I had created initially.
Well, we share that in common then, although I went into advertising specifically to learn it as a magical tool set, to do what I'm doing now. But sorry to interrupt your flow. Go ahead.
No, no, I think that's a very interesting perspective too, because I do think there's something extremely powerful about advertising, and its sort of magical context, which is very rarely sort of discussed. But yeah, I don't think I was as aware on my magical path at that time that I worked in advertising, to sort of really fully grasp that. But much later did, especially when I became more of a designer, and crafting more of sigils and such. But yeah, no, that's interesting. And then from there, yeah, I just sort of have been working on this band project for the past 10 years, which really was not the goal when I started the project. I was like, yo, we should make an album. And then eventually, somewhere like after making the first album, we ended up on tour with Tool, which was like beyond my wildest dreams.
Wow.
And then that sort of just launched the project. Like we did like a 30-date stadium tour with Tool and Primus, after sort of starting this band as sort of just like a fun little hobby. And then at that point, it was like, the booking agents come after you and managers and all that stuff. And you're like, I guess we're going to do this as a career. And then, eventually try and uh, catch up with yourself somewhere along the line, which I'm not sure we've done yet, but
That's a pretty
getting there.
unexpected origin story, right? So did you go into that with magical intent though, even if it wasn't to become a rock star? I mean, did
Yeah,
you?
yeah. I think creating the album was sort of the first album was a sort of diary for how I felt at the time. So I knew I needed to kind of like get it out of me and sort of create this sort of like, I remember my brother was like, I always used to say, it's not final till it's on vinyl. And like this idea, I was like, I just want to make a record. Do you know what I mean? And like, that's where I want to memorialize all these thoughts and ideas that I was feeling at the time. And there was, that at that point was very much a dripping with magical intention. And then, when we got it out there, like I said, it was like the fact that anyone else liked it was crazy. Here we were just sort of like resurrecting some almost like 90s industrial vibes, which were really like born out of the fact that like I didn't think anyone was really doing a good job of that anymore. So I was like, I can only listen to so much back catalog ministry that I'm like, maybe we should make a band. So I think it was sort of born out of like, if it's not there, make it for yourself. And then the fact that anyone else liked it, like I said, was just a big bonus. And we were playing just small shows, even at like the Viper Room, and Adam Jones, the guitarist for Tool, came out and saw us play, and the strangest sort of like phenomenon of like him and me becoming very close friends. And then like I'll never forget the day that he was like basically like, hey, you want to go see a movie? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And it was The Martian with Matt Damon, and we were in line getting popcorn. And he was like, "Hey, so we're going to go back out on the road, and I showed your stuff to the rest of the guys in the band, and I thought it was really cool. So you want to go out and tour?" And I was like, "What?" Like, I didn't even know how to respond. The lady's like, "Do you want butter on your popcorn?" I was like, "Shut the fuck up!" Like, I couldn't even process how crazy that was. And then like I was like, "Of course I do," and gave him a big hug. And then I had to sit through like 2.5 hours of Matt Damon growing shit potatoes on Mars, where like all I wanted to do is like call everyone, my family and like my friends and the band. And he was like, "Put your phone away, put your phone away," in the middle. I'm like, so I had to sort of not pay attention to the whole movie as my sort of brain was reeling in the thoughts of, can I even play an arena of 20,000 people? Because I've never done anything close to that. But I just don't think you say no to an opportunity like that. You don't say, "Hey, can we do it next year?" You just go, "Fuck yeah, let's do it. We'll figure it out on the way." It's sort of a jump off the cliff and build your wings on the way down kind of theory, which, I guess paid off to a certain
Yeah,
extent.
it's interesting. I mean, I've never played before 20,000 people in a stadium, but so I imagine it's quite a head trip. But I was just going to point out, sometimes life is light. I mean, people spend their whole lives trying to prepare for stuff and have plans, and particularly magical thinking people, like to follow books and grimoires and step by step instructions and things like that. Like sometimes it's just actually that's how it is, and you got to have the presence of mind to say yes, to whatever that is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird because I'm like, in many ways, I'm very much so into like planning and plotting and sort of like outlining sort of like these sort of grand plans. And then the other half of me is like, preparing is for cowards. Just fucking do it. You know what I mean? Like, and I feel like I'm constantly sort of oscillating between those two energies. And the times that I've really just sort of, thrown caution to the wind and tried these like spontaneous, like, let's just do it, have really paid dividends for me in life. And I feel like, going back to the idea of playing in arenas is not too different from anything else. If anything, it's actually less personal. Like playing a club show, Danny Carey, like the drummer, I remember we were talking backstage because he still played in like a couple jazz projects. He's like, "Yo, when you're playing like a club and there's like 200 people in it," he's like, "You got to kill every motherfucker in the room. Like you see people's eyes. Do you know what I mean? But when you're playing in an arena, you actually don't see anyone. It's just like this giant sort of amorphic sort of static that's out there that goes occasionally, which is in many ways much less personal and like kind of less intimidating in a weird way. If you learn how to sort of like mentally sort of deal with the fact that 20,000 people out there. For me, it's always sunglasses. As you can see, I'm wearing them right now. I feel like that's always been my one sort of a little boundary that I keep in the entertainment business is I'm always wearing glasses.
Yeah. Like Bono.
Yeah, exactly. Except his are always like, frameless and blue or something like that. Which,
yeah. I'm looking forward to I'm looking forward to when you become a figurehead for the World Bank. I think that would be.
I mean, that would be great. That would be huge. That's the goal ultimately, right?
Absolutely, take over the IMF and the World Bank. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why?
Then I can actually perform my insidious plans.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about playing arenas. That makes sense to me. It's funny because the internet is like so potentially like so much huger even than arenas. I mean, like you see people, even like random YouTubers getting like millions, or Twitch streamers getting like millions and millions of viewers, and it's just like it's it's just a statistic to quote Mao or Stalin, whoever said that. But it's
yeah,
you don't even think about it.
No, it's definitely like the amount that you can. It's definitely different online, but it is like, yeah, the power of reach via this sort of prosthetic digital nervous system that connects us all at this point is wild. And it's sort of as daunting and scary at times to release a work into that world because, there's a comment section, which in an arena there is not. Actually, that's not true. Occasionally you do hear some guy like, you hear a guy from the rafters say, "You fucking suck." And you're like, cool. Like, you do get that occasionally. So there's a slight comment section, but there's nothing more horrifying than a YouTube comment section. I feel like that actually might be, one of the cesspools of the world.
Conceptualize. Like I'm much better at this now, but I used to be really bad about joining in the comment section and like replying like "you're a mom" to people and things like that. But it's like I always figured jumping in the comment section is kind of like jumping into the mosh pit or stage diving and nobody catching you sometimes.
It's exactly like that. It's like I have a sort of a, don't feed the trolls policy, because at the end of the day, that's all anyone's trying to do is like, make the conversation about them. And that's the funny thing. You could make like your life's greatest magnum opus, and like someone's essentially commenting on something just to sort of like draw the attention to them. Do you know what I mean? Like there's very little, it's very, little feedback about like, hey, this is great work. It's always just like, something that's like, well, I'm going to outsmart you now and draw the conversation to me. And you're like, cool, this is fun.
It's ridiculous. I mean, not to get too off on a tangent with this, but I've seen it. Particularly artistic and creative people are like, to a fault sensitive and very invested.
Yeah.
They're showing their soul for a living. But I've seen multi-million-dollar projects tanked by this. Like, I think the most recent dramatic example was, I don't know if you're into video games at all, but the game Last of Us 2,
Right.
which in my mind is is the greatest video game ever created, and probably the best.
It's like high art. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's amazing. It's like, yeah, I have. It's like the type of video game that can make you cry. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
A lot of video games that are sort of pulling on heartstrings in the way that is.
That is so good. It's like a true masterpiece. I feel like it's better than. Yeah. Or you could, to be less over the top, you could easily say, it's like you could not argue that that's not better than like binge watching 90% of what's on Netflix. It's better than
totally. It's putting you in the driver's seat of cinema. Like it's an amazing, powerful experience that I think that a lot of people don't give video games the credit they deserve in terms of how high of an art it is at this point.
Absolutely, and that game, and also the first Last of Us, but particularly the second one, are just phenomenal. And then, but you probably saw like the second it came out, the troll army went for it because the main character is revealed to be a lesbian and is dating a Jewish girl. Like they lost their mind. It was just like awful. And the creator,
the gamer community is not known for being the most tolerant.
No, it was just a mess. And but the creator was taking it really personally and just like lashing out at trolls on Twitter, and it just overshadowed the release of this game, which is just a phenomenal, human achievement.
Sucks.
And so, yeah, it's just it still, overshadowed the entire release. Anyways, tangent.
That is something I sort of do miss about the 90s. And like, I think about music in the 90s in that respect, where it's like, there was no comment section to the cool magazine you picked up in the mall or wherever. You know what I mean? Like that sort of idea of mystique, and sort of, you just got the work and the work spoke for itself. And if you wanted to say something, it had to sort of be published. But, everyone has an opinion, and it's amplified now. And that's just sort of where we're at. And I'm not trying to sound like the old guy who's like, hey, I miss the old days. But there is a certain sense of art and for purity, that allowed it to the art just to speak for itself.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned, like Ministry and late 80s, early 90s industrial, which is obviously the music that's the music I grew up with also. And just that era was so ridiculously edgelordy, and boundary pushing, and even like Feral House and things like that. And that same energy probably later ended up in 4chan, but
totally. And like the trad goths, certainly, and the trad rivet heads or whatever, are sort of like definitely some of the people that have led charges on that 4chan, etc.
But like even thinking back to that era, like it's hard to imagine people making that type of stuff now.
No, definitely not. I feel like it's really hard to do something truly transgressive today, because I do feel like there's not that much terrain left to transgress, where the transgression in today's society is more along the lines of like wearing a MAGA hat. Like that's sort of like a pentagram in the 90s at high school. Do you know what I mean? Where people were like, oh my God, like you'd be ostracized for it. But now everyone's got the pentagram, and everyone's got the Manson shirt. And now the only way you can like seemingly piss someone off is like wear a MAGA hat, which is just sort of the strange sort of like mutation chamber of identity politics that is like really entirely flipped its script now, which is kind of sad and kind of shitty,
certainly not nearly as fun as it used to be. Is that I mean, so as an artist working now, is that a dynamic that, because it's obviously not the early 90s, it's not, you can't shock people by releasing Psalm 69 anymore, right? So in playing with that dynamic now as an artist, how does that work? Has that mutated for you as
It's a
your decisions?
Absolutely, absolutely. From the first record that we put out in like 2014, during the Obama administration, when it was like, you could really sort of have these like hard anti-systemic sort of like, lashings at the state, which like kind of still meant something. But then slowly, into the Trump administration, it became a commonplace for everyone to sort of be like, fuck the system, everything's broken, blah, blah, blah. And then when that sort of becomes commonplace, it's like, all right, cool. What are we talking about now? And I still think there's space to sort of create cognitive dissonance within that, and sort of create some, some like almost traps where people get pulled in, like, oh yeah, they're talking about this. And then once you get them in, you kind of fuck with them. But that stuff is like vastly more complicated now. Like the sort of President X character that we created, I feel like was an interesting example of that, where really it was just, we kind of pulled in some of the conspiracy theory nuts, but really what we were doing, kind of making fun of them in a weird way, and then sort of poking fun at all sides of the government. But again, I do think that sometimes that's missed, where people just sort of will take it and interpret their own way, and you go, it is what it is.
That's really interesting. Yeah, politics have become very unfun, but I think that despite that, I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think that over the last 2 years, I think maybe it's time for, the classic the classic edgelord approach again. I think it's time for shocking people again, probably, because I think that for the last 2 years, people have become, and the people you would least expect have become more shockingly and sickeningly lapdoggy and complacent and
yes,
trusting and not just trusting.
I think you're seeing it in certain places.
Absolutely.
It's like Lil Nas X video seemed to piss everyone off, which to me was always like, that's just sort of like, here's a dude giving a lap dance to a devil that had, they were selling Nike shoes with human blood in them. And I guess the difference is now it's like corporate sponsored edgelording, which is like, all right, whatever,
Yeah. But at the same time,
I worked in advertising too. I get it.
Right.
Those guys at Wyden Kennedy, they're clever. They literally took a slogan from a guy on death row, in his last words, it was like, just do it. And like Dan Wyden was like, hey, we should make that our, a sneaker company slogan. So it's like,
who did they take
sort
that
of
from?
using there was a guy on death row up in Oregon, a murderer who, the day in the paper, they're like the final words of him. And he was like, we're just do it. And like Dan Wyden, the main advertising mind behind Nike, was like, that's perfect. And then adopted it, which I always found to be,
I didn't know that.
A good example of how that brand operates.
That's like the perfect example of, the nihilism at the heart of, American consumer culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely.
What I was going to point out too is it's like each side of the political spectrum has its own kind of like agreed upon and branded version of agitation, where it's like, on the right, you have like the incessant like dudes over dudes on the other side of their career complaining about cancel culture, and then on the left you have all the narrative there. So, right, exactly. So those are both so profoundly moribund and boring and stale that I think there's room again to maybe do some shocking and button pushing in a new way. And I don't necessarily know what that way is.
Oh, there's definitely it's a psyop though now. It's like, it's less just like, hey, let's just like make some shock rock. It's like now you have to sort of be like, doing a cunning psyop in the same way that the CIA has probably made both of those sides have those sort of sensitivities to those things, where it's like, there's a way to kind of get in there and almost try and bring them together, which I feel like is the real sort of magic trick. Is like, I have this theory that, the CIA has separated the brains from the balls in this country, and the red states being the balls and the blue states being the brains, because there's nothing scarier than a united working class with brains and balls. And the idea that like if you can sort of connect those two and realize that like they're actually not each other's enemies, and that the enemies might be something else, like a bunch of billionaires who are just trying to keep everything below them fighting. Which, not to put my tinfoil hat on right now, but I do feel like if there was a way of creating a more united working class in this respect, that would be the ultimate psyop sort of edgelord magic trick.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I felt that way for a long time, and I remember even thinking about that. The idea of trying to make some type of unification of Occupy and the Tea Party when those were happening. But now, I mean, particularly post Occupy, I think you're right in that so much of the psyops, and I think they are psyops, have been to divide the working class. I mean, that's like every war, this is not a pro-Marxist statement, but every war since every war since Marx and Engels has basically been fought either over communism or from a secondary effect of communism or reaction to it. And so, I think it's, you can make a fairly straightforward read of history post 1900s that everything, the story of what's going on is preventing a unified working class.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's almost like apparent to the point now, but I feel like no matter what, like, people are going to either be like, it's like everyone is so side driven right now. The tribalism in this country is so factioned off in such a crazy way. And the media is driving that narrative so hard on either side, where it's like, you're either a Fox News junkie or a CNN junkie. Take your pick,
Yeah, and they're
sports
both
teams at this point.
They're both, and they're worse than they were.
They're both
worse than ever.
And they're both getting their CIA memos every fucking morning anyways. You know what I mean? So
absolutely. No, that's a real thing. People don't understand that that's not a conspiracy theory. That's actually a real thing. Like people are actually
I actually believe it's called Operation Mockingbird, I believe is what it was called. And it's disclosed. You can read about it, it's modified since then, but initially it was Operation Mockingbird.
I was watching Fox News the other day, as I of course do with all of my free time, with the volume turned all the way up. But and like Sean Hannity is literally wearing a CIA pin. It's like, what? Like,
yeah,
weren't you just complaining about the deep state last year when Trump was president and you were following that script? Like, what's going on, man?
I can't stand these guys. The funniest thing to me right now is how these guys Marco Rubio is like leading the charge on alien disclosure, and then you have Tucker Carlson talking about the aliens and the importance. And it's just like at this point, it just seems so fucking stupid to me.
They've all got to be laughing.
I've never wanted to first off, yes, aliens are real. There's a lot of reasons why I believe in aliens. But the minute these people start talking about aliens, it's like this stuff is bullshit. What they're talking about,
they've got to be doing blow and laughing their asses off when they're not on camera. I actually had an ex-girlfriend. I had an ex-girlfriend who worked at Fox News in the early 2000s, and she was constantly banging dudes in the main newsroom after hours, and she said it was just ridiculous, and they just don't care.
I'm sure those are the Roger Ailes days. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Imagine how wild it was over there. It was probably a big fuck fest. There is a part of me though that just really wants to see Marco Rubio make first contact with the alien sort of galactic federation, where he goes to shake the alien's hand and the alien just fries him like a mozzarella stick. There's parts of me that would just love to see that, but I don't think
my favorite of all of those guys, I have to say, is Matt Gaetz. I don't know if you followed the Matt Gaetz saga.
Yes.
One
look at that guy's face and he's guilty. The guy's a creature.
But even before that, my favorite Matt Gaetz moment, this is as they refer to it on Know Your Meme, the Matt Gaetz Nestor reveal. Do you remember that?
No, I've not.
Oh my God.
Not seen that.
Okay, so this must have been a year. It was post George Floyd. They were having a hearing on the Senate floor, or wherever they were, and somebody was standing up talking about how no one can understand what this is like. If you're a person of color and you have children, you don't know, if they're going to come home, every day and things like this. And so Matt Gaetz stands up and says, how could you insinuate that we don't know what it's like to have a child of color? I myself have a child of color." And everyone just like, there's like pin drops in the room, and everyone looks at him and it's like, what are you talking about? So then it turns out that Matt Gaetz, a single 38-year-old man, adopted a kid named Nestor from, I think, Cuba or somewhere in South America, and brought him as a 17-year-old. I think originally as a 14-year-old, he was 17 at the time. Brought this boy to live with him, Matt Gaetz, in Florida, a single 38-year-old man. And then he proceeded to post a picture on Twitter of both of them like in polos with like aviator sunglasses on.
I mean, he was probably waiting. He did that for this exact moment. You know what I mean? He was just waiting for the day to play that card. You know what I mean?
He's going to run for
Who knows?
president
That guy's.
too. He's going to run for president next year, or not. I mean, excuse me, next election.
The bar has been lowered. The bar has been lowered very, very far. I don't think the office of presidency will ever be the same in this country, which is, probably not a bad thing. Because I feel like I think we're probably past the part where we need an alpha world leader to sort of decide what we're going to do at this point. I think America is sort of a dying star. I do love America. I love the land. I love the people. I love, all these things, but fuck the state. People, I think, oftentimes forget that you can sort of love the land, the people, the energy, the ideas and the creativity and the ingenuity of a place, as opposed to being like the government, like fuck the government, but love America.
Well, and fuck the empire also, and I think particularly traveling around the world, I'm sure you've had the same experience. When you talk to people around the world, they all love American culture and American people, but they hate the American government because they don't want to die, and I think I think that's something that Americans need to be more aware of. But I agree with you about president. I mean, it could become a ceremonial role like the Queen or something like that,
That's all it is. It's a symbolic position.
Yeah.
No. And Frank Zappa called it the entertainment division of the military industrial complex, which I think was pretty spot on.
Yeah. He had a few.
And I think that ultimately, yeah, totally. And I think that ultimately, we've kind of just proved to ourselves that it's not something that is, we've got a geriatric in there now. We had a reality TV star before that. And it's like, at this point, it's just become this sort of strange reality show of just really poorly written infotainment. You know what I mean? It's just not even good anymore. It's just like, all right, it's ran its course. Well, we got to figure something.
That's what's so weird. And, you're still, LA adjacent. So I think that, that's what's so weird to me about seeing people who are like all on board for Biden Harris. It's like intelligent people who are like, yeah, like whatever they say, like they're going to save us.
Yeah, I also think it's just like that's the sort of like strange paralysis and myopia that like we came out of the Trump administration with, where we were just like a lot of people were just so horrified by that they were like anything will, and then we can go back to our sort of centrist pacification. And it is that it's centrist. It's not. There's no left in this country. We have a corporate right and a corporate center, and we're back to corporate center, which at least people can get back on with their lives and sort of at least think that like everything's going to be okay, because we sort of have this like visionless future now, which is a strange phenomenon.
That's a good phrase.
Where like no one has any vision of the future. The people who are providing vision now are like, these sort of cosmic kind of hucksters like Elon Musk. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, don't worry, we're going to go to Mars. Or like, oh, is that our solution? We're like, we basically turn like everyone dies except for billionaires who become refugees of our planet, which is like, that's crazy.
It is.
Yeah. And then the idea that like, like I just don't see Elon Musk being the guy that brings us to Mars. I just fucking hope not. That's just so strange.
It'll be Jeff Bezos then,
Yeah, it'll probably be Bezos or him. And like the idea that like, you get there and it's like already like, shopping facilities on there. And like, it's just so tragic, like, I think that's why it's easier for people to think of the end of the world than it is the end of our system. Do you know what I mean? Like we have no other options. All we've been fed is these sort of like, entertainment narratives of dystopia and apocalypse. That like, there hasn't been any like other like utopian ideas that like, well, maybe we'll try this. So it's like, we all just sort of envision just total decimation now, which is pretty fucked up. But I
Yeah.
feel like that's sort of where people are at, and that's why they're sort of, there's that sense of paralysis, I suppose, where everyone's
Yeah.
just sort of like, exhausted and sort of just like at this point they're like, well, at least we can coast with a sort of like 4 years of this Biden guy, which is not a great way to be approaching anything.
Yeah, it's weird that particularly, I mean, I've been on that same page for a long time. I think that it's weird that when people got the chance to do the apocalypse, I mean, we kind of did it. I remember, but it wasn't that impressive. I remember something Grant, and I know you know Grant as well. Something Grant said to me like a long time ago. I think like at the Comic-Con. This must have been like 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. Um, we were talking about the apocalypse, and he said that he said something like even the apocalypse is going to be disappointing. You know,
Totally.
like people are
Absolutely.
so fundamentally lazy. Like we're even going to
Yeah.
half-ass the apocalypse, and it's totally true.
Absolutely.
Like that's basically what just
I mean, he
happened.
nailed that one. We're sort of in, I call it like boring apocalypse. It's just a slow, the universe started in a bang and ends in a whimper. You know what I mean? Like that's
Right.
the whole theory. It just sort of slowly whimpers out, which is sort
It
of like,
ends in
that
it ends in
sucks.
Postmates, and getting
Yes,
your food
exactly.
delivered to you.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. Which is like totally what's going to happen with aliens. Even when they arrive, we're going to be like, "So why are you here?" And they're going to be like, "We love Panda Express or something." We're going to be like, "Wait, what? Like this is why aliens are here?" It's going to be something so stupid and mundane that we're going to be
right.
like, "All right, forget it."
That'll be the
Like we're
first
like,
thing
they
to
must be
Mars.
so smart.
That'll
Yeah,
be the
yeah.
first
They're
thing to
like
Mars.
aliens are. They must
Panda
be so
Express.
smart.
Be Panda
Yeah,
Express on
totally. And
on,
the
on Mars. Well, so you said something interesting earlier. One of the things you said was just about connecting brains and balls, and then you also talked about political tribalism and how that's so easy to
yes,
tweak. Which I think like tweaking the tribalism by throwing in ideas associated with the other tribe, but wrapping them in acceptable ideas is a really good way to rattle people. And
yes,
one example of that is,
yes,
obviously the fact that you have become a Gunstagrammer, which I think is definitely worth talking
yes,
about from a lot of different angles, right? So
yes.
I think we were
And
talking.
this was something that was actually very like it was well the intention behind it. And I'm going to let you finish was exactly this that you're going to talk about. So continue.
Well,
It
I,
was
I
total
think
cognitive dissonance.
okay. Well, yeah, that's kind of where I was going with it. But I remember just talking. The last thing I was going to say there is, I think we were talking on Instagram, and you were saying you were kind of hesitant to come out as a gun guy, which
Yeah,
I've
to
actually
come out of my
never.
gun closet.
Right, which I haven't really like. I mean, I mention it, talk about it in courses and things like that, but I don't like post that. I don't go full gun bunny on Instagram because I just like I'm such a nerdy dude.
Yeah,
I don't want to seem like I don't know if I can pull it off. I don't know if I can quite rock the look. You do it
it,
pretty well though.
it's
So
it's it's a fine line to walk. Do you know what I mean? Because like obviously the fetishizing of guns is not something that most reasonable people would look up as a normal or okay behavior. But I feel like I've done enough of the other side of sort of like transgressive like hyper lefty stuff in my day that like it's okay to be like also look like I do also like guns, and then people just start scratching their heads because I have like a ton of these sort of like military bros that are fans of my music, because at the end of the day I don't want to just talk and reinforce to like a niche LA audience that like is
mhm.
already like super like on some next level shit like I might be. Like I want to talk to middle America, get them in a comfortable place with sort of some
Mm.
familiarity, like, oh, the guns, the muscles, the mustache. And then when I have them right where I
Ah,
want them, then start opening their minds. You know what I mean? It's the whole
that's
frog
interesting.
in lukewarm water, and then you heat them up. Because if I'm going to be using this sort of like guerrilla ontology tactics, you need to sort of get their guards down. Do you know what I mean? So that way you're not some leftist liberal cuck snowflake to them. You're like, wait, they go, wait. So like, there's a sense of, familiarity that they get comfortable with, I
Yeah,
suppose.
that's really clever, and I hadn't thought about it from that angle at all. At all, I kind of, I only think about it from the angle of forgive me, but triggering people. But actually,
Yes.
I'm not interested because I don't post about it at all. I'm actually legitimately, interested in that pursuit. I don't turn it into like Like it's not like an actual
Yeah.
top thing for me. But what the way that
Yeah,
you the way that you
I'm not
explain
like
it,
my gun is lubricated, my AR-15 is lubricated with liberal tears, like that type of bullshit triggering. You're
right,
like,
right, right.
cool. Which there's a lot of people that the. Also, I did also want to go a little bit more deep cover into infiltrating the two-way community because there's a tremendous amount of information to pull out of that and what's wrong with this country. Also, and
Absolutely,
what's right with this
absolutely.
country. So
Yeah,
there's
no,
a
I
lot that
agree.
I've learned in there, a lot that I've learned while going sort of deep cover into there, which was part of my joke about wearing so much khaki this summer. I was like, khaki is the gateway drug to sort of corporate America, and I'm infiltrating. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just wore so much beige this summer that everyone was hyper confused. Granted, I was living in the desert, but also it sort of allowed me to sort of like, mix in with a little bit more of the good old boys, and then sort of, use that sort of infiltration to sort of, like I said, get in there and sort of use some guerrilla ontology, and then really see what people are, what's making the sides tick. You know what I mean? Because you can talk in your echo chamber all day long, and really it's just incredibly masturbatory. So I really wanted to get out of there, and I do have a genuine for the Second Amendment, and as I believe I am at my core a patriot, even though I've been called anti-American most of my life, which is just an incredible fascist technique, because there's no such thing as being anti-American. Or maybe there is. I don't know. It just seems silly to
Oh,
me.
there definitely is, but it's
But
not that. Yeah. Um,
yeah, yeah.
I think. Well,
It's definitely not that.
you mentioned discovering um, things that are wrong with America, things that are right with America, and also what makes the other side tick. And I just was
Yeah.
curious, your big thoughts on that, what you wanted to share when you
Yeah, I've taken a lot away from it, and at the core, I think there's a lot of fear in the two-way community. We'll start with the bad things, and then go into some of the good things. I think there's an incredible amount of fear embedded into the sort of culture coding of the Second Amendment. This idea that people want to take your arms, the fact that law and order is going to fall apart, the idea that this is the only way you're going to be able to protect yourself. I also think there's a lot of racism in there that I've noticed, a lot of intolerance, a lot of anti LGBT rhetoric that is just sort of like, you can tell is just Fox News pumped agenda of like, here's what they want to do with your country. Do you know what I mean?
right.
So there's a tremendous amount of fear in there.
Well, there's always that they're
But
going to
then,
for your guns, and then there's going to be riots, and there's
yes,
but such like an
yes,
undercurrent of racism to that is
yes,
unignorable.
yes. Which the irony is, nothing sells firearms better than a Democratic president. So I think a lot of that stuff is obviously they know what they're doing. They know how to sort of drive. There's 17-month record-breaking sale of background checks and gun sales in the country this year. It's like there's more people buying guns than ever, and I think that's because they can drive that rhetoric so hard. When the idea is that they are actually trying to pass some of it. Who knows if it'll ever through? I don't think they'll ever take away the Second Amendment in this country, so I don't worry about it too much. They might neuter your stuff a little bit, like in California, but you can always be non-compliant, like me. Bada bing. So that's the bad stuff, obviously, which is somewhat apparent. But then at the core, I think there's a lot of actual community and camaraderie and a lot of love on the good side, where I think there's like sort of like my thoughts on guns are, if you spend money on guns, and this is a hard one to explain, but like those guns in 100 years from now are like gonna still be guns in the way that they're made and the craftsmanship and the sort of industry. It's all sort of like this, like American made, and it's like we're done with tremendous quality. Every time I buy an iPhone, I have a drawer full of old iPhones that
Yeah.
will never work again. I have a closet full of guns that will forever be guns. There's something to be said about that level of lack of planned obsolescence in that industry that I think is something really cool. I also think that, I've been in ranges and in communities where so many differences are set aside oftentimes by a camaraderie for, like if you like guns, you're good by me. It doesn't matter if you're black or you're white or
Yeah,
anything.
that's 100% real. That's 100% real.
I've seen people come together that like couldn't be, just from further walks of life and kind of bond over, the gun, which is so strange.
Yeah, I've seen like even up
But
at Angeles Crest, I've seen like like trans people and like like quote unquote
totally,
little boys like
absolutely,
getting along, talking about guns. So yeah,
yeah. And it's actually one of the few places where those two things might actually intersect. Like I said, there's obviously a dark side of it, but there is a strangely light side of it. Where there's sort of their bond over a distrust for the government or something can actually sort of transcend all their differences. So, it's been interesting. And like I said, I wanted to kind of get in there and kind of pull some data off it, but also I did also want to get free stuff from gun companies. I can't deny that.
Oh, nice.
Being a gunstagrammer, you get a lot of free stuff.
You're riding that grand thumb train.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little wake behind them that you can kind of pull some swag off of.
Nice. So, were you always interested in that, or did you kind of consciously go into it at a certain point?
Well, having an uncle who had a lot of firearms as a kid, and I was just sort of liked guns and shooting them. I was sort of more of a casual shooter. I shot skeet a lot, sort of a hobby of mine. But then when it really came into more gunsmithing and building them, I was something that that's when my passion for it really sort of because I just going back to the sort of, your theories on men being sort of weirdly, technical, and that sort of almost fetish for technicality and stuff like that. I think that, I just love building any type of precision sort of instrument, being able to tune it. And it's a great way to fill time. And for me, I'm not one of those people that kind of sit around and do nothing when I have free time. I like to fill my time. And then I guess, in the process of having a lot more free time during the pandemic, just built a lot of guns.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I definitely enjoy that quite a lot also. Interesting. I mean, I got for whatever reason, I got I go into real obsessive tunnels about things. And I'd always been kind of into it, but I got very focused on it maybe 3 years ago, something like that, and got just, wanted to learn everything. And the biggest, I had all the experiences you did too. I also, in learning, I think, particularly from the Second Amendment community, I think the biggest thing was learning the other side. And this was, I can't understate how important this is, learning the other side of the anti-government narrative. Because if you just get the left side's version of why they're pissed, it's only half of the story. Because the whole second half of the story is on the other side, which includes things like, Waco and Ruby Ridge and I mean, it's
absolutely. Basically, what happened in the 90s when they were the U.S. a portion of the U.S. population was at war with the government, which has been sort of quietly put to sleep.
It really has. It's been. But now they have the guy responsible for Waco, because, they're pushing as the head of the ATF. So the history is
super fucked up.
Yeah, it really is. And people don't remember that. And oddly enough, and if they remember it, they remember the official government narrative about it, which was a lie. And so, and I definitely noticed that the fight over, first of all, it's ridiculous how much people make fun of Second Amendment people, but because of you get an understanding of how it's not just critical to the way the country functions, but it's it's there for a reason. It really is. And the fight over the Second Amendment, you can just track back archaeologically, is 1-to-1 correlated with the fight over our individual freedom at all. Whether it's that, also the First Amendment, but which is why you mentioned the thing about disconnecting brains from balls. The thing that has driven me crazy for so long is seeing neither side of the political fight wants all of our rights intact. You have the left wants the First Amendment taken away, and left now wants the First and Second Amendment taken away. But it's but you don't have, at neither side of the political fence wants rights.
Yeah, and the reality is one is there to protect the other. The Second Amendment is there to protect the First Amendment, and that's what the Founding Fathers wanted. And the idea that somehow disarming our population would make it safer is just insane to me. I mean, again, kind of like you said, pulling yourself out of the echo chamber by going and learning more about some of the 2A community has been hugely enlightening. And I aside from a lot of the paranoia that is there, I think that there is a tremendous amount of truth that's there as well. And I think that, as a person who is sort of obsessed with their own sort of autonomy, the idea that, listen, if the state has these guns, then you should have them too. It's as simple as that. Do you know what I mean?
It really is.
I would I like to I like to be my own sort of little sovereign micronation. And if they have their defense department, you should have yours. The idea that
I
like you're
couldn't
going to
agree
rely
with
on
you
them to
more.
do that for you is insane.
I couldn't agree with you
It's
more,
as
and
basic
I'm on
as
the
that.
same page. I'm on the same page, and that's what people really don't understand about the AR-15 argument either, which is people give this ridiculous argument that it's like, well, the founding fathers couldn't have foreseen these weapons of war that don't belong on our streets. Like, well, first of all, it's a 22 rifle. It's like it's not a machine gun. Okay, it's a semi-automatic sporting rifle that is, not nearly as frightening as you think. But the other thing,
it's the Honda Civic of guns. It's literally
really
the Honda Civic of guns. You can put any part on it. It's sort of modular. People put like all these different parts on theirs, and you're like, that's all it is. It's a little bit of a customized, sort of all-purpose gun.
Absolutely. The other thing that people don't realize is like, well, why does the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia and things like this? The point of the Second Amendment is that there should be parity of force, parity, not parody, but parity of force between the civilian population and the military. The weapon that civilians should have should be the same standard issue weapon that the military gets, which is the M4 carbine. So it has to be not only.
And that's it. When people say, "Well, why would you need an M4?"
Right, to defend yourself. But like after we went through the last year, it's like, well, answer me that now. And I think that it's so in a sense, it's like not only does the Second Amendment cover the AR-15, it's for the AR-15 currently, right now.
Absolutely,
until it becomes something else.
Yeah.
And it won't.
And I also think that, the idea that somehow the AR-15 is like the demon of like gun violence. If you actually look at the statistics of gun violence, there's something like 36,000 gun deaths a year in this country, which is almost exact to the same amount of car accident deaths in this country, which, follow me on this one. At the end of the day, if you look at how many accidents happen from speeding, which is like vast, it's like, something like 80% of car accidents happen because of speeding, but like 1% of those deaths happen from school shootings, but yet we want to ban the AR-15. So how come cars are allowed to go above 60 miles an hour? Do you need a car that goes over 60 miles an hour? No, you don't. But why do you? Because you can, and it's America. So you should still be able to have a gun that shoots more than 10 round capacity. It's like,
right.
It just seems insane to me.
There's a lot of
1% of gun violence is mass shooting. Is that too much? Probably.
Well, the other thing about mass shooting, if you look at the mass shooting data, 97% of it is done with handguns. It's just that it's not the AR-15. Now, that said, the ones that have been done with AR-15s, for instance, Sandy Hook. I don't know how anyone with a soul can look at Sandy Hook and not just be like shattered to their core if they really consider it.
It's absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
But also 60% of that number of 35,000 is suicide.
Which
is something that no one talks about.
Yeah. And
that's suicide. 60% of that 35,000 is suicide, and no one's shooting themselves with an AR-15. That's talking more about the sensibilities of our society right now that requires a deeper sort of closer look of our mental health scenario.
The other thing about that is overwhelmingly the only people, like, women don't shoot themselves. Women commit suicide. We're getting dark here. Women commit suicide usually with, they put their head in the oven, or they leave the car on, things like this, or they take an overdose. And men commit suicide violently. Women don't, right?
Yes.
And so why aren't we talking about, for instance, the suicide rate among middle-aged white men in this country is higher than any other group? Why aren't we talking about that?
Right? Yeah,
why are people killing themselves?
That's not a marketable narrative right now.
Yeah. So I think
that doesn't sell sneakers.
Yeah, the gun control thing for me is after learning more about it, and I didn't always know a lot about it, but after I think having pretty much the same experience of you, going into the community and just learning and educating myself on it, the gun control thing is a complete non-starter for me. You can't get the idea that people are running around with machine guns, gunning everyone down, just isn't true, right? You can't get machine guns in this country. You haven't been able to since the 30s or whatever.
I don't think people really fully know the definition of a machine gun, or the idea that an assault weapon is just sort of a manufactured sort of word that people sort of came up to demonize the weapon. But the idea that an AR-15, for the listeners who don't know, it's the gun shoots one round downrange at a time every time you pull a trigger, like any other semi-automatic weapon. It's not a
Same as
fully
a pistol.
automatic weapon. Yeah, same as a pistol. The idea that it's any less or more lethal than a Glock or any other, even a revolver for that point is not true. The bullet is a bullet. It's not like a video game where you just hold down the trigger and it just auto
Right.
fires. That's something that is impossible to get on the streets unless you are an active military or SWAT or something like that. Which
Or in a
I think it's hard
cartel.
for them even.
Or in a cartel.
Or in a
Right?
cartel,
It's like,
exactly.
which is another
Yeah,
reason why people
yeah.
shouldn't be
Unless you're
dishonest.
running guns. Yeah, totally. And I think the idea that the gun genie is out of the bottle in this country and it doesn't get put back in. Listen, if we were completely, if guns didn't exist, it wouldn't be like, hey, we don't need them. If we had a military that carried whistles and a set of keys because that's what the world required because there was no guns, then fine. But unfortunately, that's not the universe that we live in. And like I said, you're not putting the gun back in the bottle or the genie back in the bottle here. There's a tremendous amount of high-powered firearms that exist out there, and I would rather be someone who has one than doesn't have one. And I would like to know how to use it. I think it's a utility that I like teaching all my friends how to become proficient and very safe and sort of respect firearms. Because in the same way that I think you should probably know how to drive stick. What if you have to do at one point?
Mhm.
You probably never have to use your hand or your
Shit,
gun
I
in
don't
your
know how
life,
to drive stick.
but we should learn because you never
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. That's true.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, I don't even have
yeah.
a car, so, but because I've
There you go. I
foregone.
just lived in Italy for quite some time, and like I don't even think they
Uh,
have automatic cars over there. So
well, interestingly enough, one of the things that really made me reconsider the gun argument also was living in England for a year, and
yes,
I realized a couple things. All the stereotypes that Europeans have about Americans, they're way worse at. Like just the
yeah.
trashiness of the culture, like how rude people are.
Let's talk about racism for one. I think
Ah,
that everyone thinks, oh, America's so racist. I think Europe is vastly more racist than
hmm.
America. And I lived in Europe for 5 years. I did my university there and studied political science, and I saw more racism in Europe than I've ever seen in this country. Which I think that you know but they don't talk about Europe being racist, which is interesting to me.
Well, I one thing that living over there made me appreciate is like how nice Americans are. Americans are really,
Yes.
really nice and
Yeah.
polite, like amazingly so. Like we line up. We're not abrasive to
Yes.
each other by and large. And one of the things I realized when I was, and I would go out, it's probably the same in Italy, right? But I would go out in London on a Friday, Saturday night, and I'd be coming home, and there'd just be pools of blood on the ground, like in the tube and things like that. And what I
Totally.
realized was people fight recreationally there. They do it for fun. It's
Well,
like one of
because
their
I
way.
think
They're
because
not going to get
that
shot,
politeness. Yeah. Well, an armed society is a polite society,
right?
as that sort of maxim goes. Where if you're in Texas, you're not trying to road rage on people and fight anyone because you're like everyone's probably got a gun and I don't want to get shot.
Yeah.
So there is a weird sort of truth to that. And I also, when you sometimes see a video on TikTok of like some dude beating up a cop in the east side of London or something, and you're like that would never like it's like just a good old fashioned innocent fist fight or something, which just feels crazy to me. But
Right.
there's something also kind of nice about that, knowing that you could still get in a scuffle and not be shot. So, I'm not sure one's better than the other, but I do think that America just sort of is America and it's so embedded in our DNA. I think, the idea that a country that was founded in the bloodshed of a gun, of a gunfight, I believe in somewhere in Concord, Massachusetts, that sort of initiated the shot heard around the world, which sort
Mm.
of said, oh, cool. Now, which we fought our independence for. And I think that like the idea that the country was literally founded on a gunshot. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
you're not
Yeah.
separating that DNA from this country.
Yeah. I mean, it's like there's a few. One of the things
I
about
think
Americans is we really we embed our ideology in devices, and I think that the three big American American devices are the electric guitar, the car, and
yes,
the gun, the AR-15, or previous guns, right?
yeah,
Like the Colt Peacemaker, things
yeah,
like
yeah,
this.
for sure.
The
Yeah,
1911, right? And it's like that. Those items essentially it's like you touch them and you can see the eagle, the eagle flying in the background, you know, like it's
Oh,
like
totally,
you're
man.
almost
And
immediately feel America by picking something like that up. And that's a
yeah,
good
and I
thing.
do think that, I think it's a good thing, and I think it just also is just the thing. Do you know what I mean? It's not that it should be changed in that respect. There's a lot of things I do think should be changed, but until, like I said, that our police don't carry guns, or that our we disarmed the military, which is not going to happen.
Yeah.
I think that we should have what the state has.
Yeah,
I'm just settling on that.
we don't want
It's
to
as
be
simple.
defenseless. We don't want to be just waiting to be
Yeah.
victimized by the military. Nobody
I
does
mean, I think
anywhere.
we've already seen, especially during the pandemic, that like the further you are outside of the power structures, the more likely you are to die. Do you know what I mean? And I think that, like,
Yeah.
in a weird way, a gun levels a playing field and creates a certain sense of equality. And I've always tried to thought how to articulate this, and I don't think I know how to yet. But there is a certain sense of equality that the gun represents. The gun represents a sort of leveling of the playing field, because the bullet can just be, it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor or a different color or whatever. The bullet would still do the same thing to anyone. And I know it's a fucked up way to look at it, but it's sort of strengely true. You know what I
Well,
mean?
I
It's
think no,
like,
that's
I
it
think that it's
exactly. I think the other side of that too is it levels the playing field of force, because everyone has a different body. You know, some people are like, like you or I, like tall, like tall dudes who can probably fight and things like this.
yeah,
But like you look, a gun, you could be in a wheelchair, you could be, a frail woman,
totally,
you could be elderly. It
yeah,
doesn't matter. All of a sudden, force, it's a
yeah,
force leveler. It's not even a force
yeah.
multiplier, the force leveler. And that's one of
It's
the
just a
arguments.
leveler. Yeah,
That's one of the arguments about full capacity magazines, standard capacity magazines. It's like, why would anyone need 30 rounds in an AR? It's like, well, maybe you're a woman in a wheelchair, or maybe you're just freaked out as hell
yeah,
because 7 dudes just came into your house and you're missing.
yeah,
It's like, I don't
yeah.
know if
Well,
you've ever
30
had the
rounds in
experience
general.
of,
Dude, I can shoot 30
fighting with
rounds in like
munitions.
half a second. Do you know
Oh
what I
yeah,
mean? Like,
yeah.
30 rounds is not that much. It's not, it's like, at the end of the
Well,
day,
not literally,
I've
just
never
not to
been,
confuse
I've
people about
never
the
been,
machine gun thing, but yeah.
yeah, I've never been in a gunfight, thank God. But I would imagine that most of a gunfight is spent shooting suppressive fire, as opposed to sort of, putting a shot on target, because you're going to be so scared that you're just going to be sort of hiding behind something, just unloading to sort of keep the other people's positions pinned back. So
Right.
just out of
And you're
basic,
going to be
logic
jittering,
of that scenario.
terrified. And
Yeah,
the
totally.
most valuable training experience I ever had with firearms, I did a lot of training, was, and for a long time I thought like, I'm really like, I'm like hitting things with a Glock at like 260 meters, things like this. It's like, wow, I'm like a badass, but then, and that's on paper, like on the range or at, outdoors, things like that. But the most valuable training experience I ever had was with simunitions, which is kind of like paintballs, for those people who don't
Yeah,
know about it. And it was simulating real life situations, like what would you do if there was an active shooter, things like that. And I
yeah,
realized that under adrenaline, and this isn't even in a real situation, it's like somebody just shows
yeah.
up with a simunitions gun. I couldn't hit something 5 feet in front of me because the adrenaline
Totally.
dump is a
Yeah.
real thing. Like all your
Yeah.
fine motor skills are
I
out
mean,
the
even
window.
you can have someone even at a, like, taking someone to shoot for the first time, because there's obviously incredible amount of adrenaline from squeezing a Glock and from like, oh my God, it's about to go bang, and all this sort of anticipation and flinch. You can put a target 5 yards in front of someone who's never shot a gun, and they'll miss the target at 5 yards
Yeah.
out of range, just because it's such an intense experience of shooting a gun for the first time, which is always interesting. It blows people's minds of like how hard it is to shoot handguns.
Mm.
It's an incredible amount of challenge that requires tons of training. And
Yeah.
yeah, with all
It's
that
an
adrenaline
explosion
pumping
going
and
off
stuff
in
like
your
that.
hand. It's like
Yeah, it's
everything, your
wild.
brain is wired to not do that.
Yeah. Which is another thing that, maybe we could segue into this, where there's something I find incredibly meditative about shooting, in the sort of fact that it makes you so present, because it is intense, because there's no room to be thinking about something else, because it's a dangerous thing to do. So it requires an intense amount of focus that makes you so present minded and now, that I find like when I leave the gun range, I am like as docile as a Hindu cow. I'm like super zen and focused, and it feels very cathartic and sort of meditative. That, people call that gun therapy, which is, it's a thing. And I know
Oh
that sounds
yeah.
crazy to some people
No,
who
it's
don't
for
shoot,
real.
but I find that, yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
definitely.
Well, let me ask you about that. I think that is a good segue because I was wanting to ask you about we haven't even talked about magic, but going into going into any experience as a magical thinker is different, right? So my question is kind of,
Mm-hmm.
what going into the I don't know what you want to call it, the gun experience uh,
Mm-hmm.
as a magician, what that was, how that was different, and I'll share just briefly my own experience, which is that I found that you mentioned earlier that you like to be autonomous and you like to be your own kind of sovereign nation, which I couldn't agree with you more.
Yes.
I'm exactly the same way. And felt that there was something about taking that journey and going from somebody who, exactly like you just said, like, firing a gun for the first time, like, woo, what is this, to being competent
Yeah.
and confident at
Yeah.
more and more complex platforms, there was something so deeply not just maturing about that, because also it's like, at the end of the day, you're holding life or death in your hands, and you have to be, and there's no
Yeah.
mistakes, there's no takebacks.
Yeah.
You have to be,
Yeah.
there's no wiggle room, there's no bullshitting. You have to be on point 100% of the time, or it's over. And I think that the that, but also the fact, and I think this is why there's such a fight over the Second Amendment, going from feeling defenseless in the world to the idea that anything would be a threat to me just not even existing in my mind anymore, and being autonomous in that way,
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
is fundamentally empowering and fundamentally transformative in such a real way that
Absolutely.
that once you do that, it's like, in the same way that starting a business was for me. I mean, once you do that, it's like, who can control you? Nobody, right? Maybe
Yeah.
what else can you do for yourself? Maybe you don't need the government to do for you. And I don't necessarily mean that in like some
Totally.
right wing way. I mean
Yeah.
that in an anarchist way. Maybe I can be. Maybe
Yeah.
I don't need other people to be dependent on.
Yeah. Maybe self-reliance is an actual thing and not just, a little pamphlet by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's a tremendous amount of autonomy that once you become proficient with the firearm, and even the sense of, like, I go like camping in crazy places sometimes, like in old mines and like abandoned areas of, like, BLM land, out here in California, where you're allowed to
Yes,
carry
that's
firearms and stuff like
Bureau of
that.
Land Management, right? Just for those who don't know
Yes,
the
yeah, for people
California
who don't know.
acronym.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so it's really interesting because when you go camping out there and it's 30 miles into nowhere off, crazy abandoned roads, and you have to, have a nice sort of overlanding vehicle to get there. There's no cell phone service for, almost 30 miles. And there's a sense of, like, when you're out there, it could be a horror movie. Do you know what I mean? A mountain lion, whatever. If anything happens, you're kind of fucked. But there's something about carrying a sidearm on you that you kind of feel completely proficient and safe, and sort of just like your own autonomous sort of thing out there. That, even a couple of times I heard some mountain lions, and all I did was pull my Glock out and go bing, bing, bing. And I'm like, I think we're good. Like, there's a sense of just feeling safe and sort of avoiding the potential horror movie scenarios that could happen in life when you just got your gun on you. And,
Yeah.
to
Those are
me, I
great.
don't carry. I'm not an everyday carry guy. I'm not a concealed carry guy, but when I'm camping out in the middle of nowhere, I like to have a sidearm.
There's a great Jeff Cooper quote, the great gun writer. I mean, there's a great Jeff Cooper quote about that, kind of making fun of the standard anti-gun arguments, where he says, people come up to me and they say, "Oh, why do you have to have a gun? What are you scared of?" And I say right back to them, "Nothing. I have a gun."
Exactly. Yeah, again, it's like, and I'm sure this conversation will sort of be foreign to a lot of listeners and sort of strange, and maybe they still think we're gun nuts or something like that. But I think it's important to also let people know that, like, you don't have to be a violent person to enjoy guns. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not a
No,
violent person. I
I'm a
don't want to have to
non-violent
use my
person.
gun. I have no
I
desire
like
to
I
shoot
put
my gun at
I
anyone.
when I see flies in the house, I try to like put them in a cup and let them out. It's like
Yeah.
so.
And
But
I
I
think a
think,
lot of people
yeah,
misconstrue a lot of people
I no, I'm
misconstrue
just
that, and
agreeing.
sort of, just to backtrack. Yeah, backtrack to what you were saying about sort of magical observation. This one might be a bit of a reach, but I think one of the things I've noticed within guns and the people who might be more violent, and there's certainly a lot of people who own guns and you can tell want to get to use their guns against people. Like they're just waiting for someone to break in their home.
Yeah.
There's those sort of
You remember that
scary,
Weird Al
dark
song? There was
individuals.
that Weird Al song, Trigger Happy, where he's just like, I'm just praying for someone to break in tonight. Like,
It's true though. There's some
there's
people
definitely
like
people like
that. And
that.
I guess in sort of my sort of strange sort of psycho-magical sort of inspection of that was sort of drawn towards the sort of sexual nature of guns, and how I think that maybe sort of more incel energy, or people that it's like Wilhelm Reich said fascism is like the dogma of sexual cripples or something like that, which is obviously not the best way to put it, but that was Wilhelm Reich, not me. And I think that there's something about like people who maybe have sort of maybe kind of retired or very disassociated from their sexual experience that use guns to fill that nature. And this is obviously, like I said, a reach, but obviously when you think of that movie like Zardoz, or like The Gun is Good, or like the gun is sort of the penis to them. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like the people who do want to use their guns are maybe people that are very disconnected from themselves sexually, or very repressed sexually. And again, like I said, this is probably a reach, but that was sort of my my observation more psycho-magically upon it.
Well, I don't think
more in touch with themselves sexually.
I don't think it's too much of a reach around. No, I think
too much of a reach around. Exactly.
No, I think you're definitely right. And it's like, there's not necessarily anything bad with that either. It's like, you gotta let old dudes be old dudes, but at the same time, but I would say, on the other side of that, I think there's also something extremely psychosexual about people who are just extreme anti-gun people, or who are like, anything. There's a certain, I get little Robert Anton Wilson about this. I think there's very much a certain mentality on particularly like the most like hardcore DNC people. I don't even want to say extreme left, because everyone says the extreme left. Right. It's not the extreme left. When I think of like the left, quote unquote, which the quote unquote extreme left, which for America, which for Europe would just be center, it's like, I think of people who are actually Marxists or anarchists.
Yes.
They're ideological, they're principled, they have a stance, which even if I don't agree with, I respect, because they have their thing that they're working. Right. But what I don't
the DNC left is the neoliberal corporate utopia.
Just like I'm just repeating CNN talking points. But there's a certain character, to be Reichian about it, a certain character type that, I refer to as the castrator. They don't like guns. They don't like guys who want, they don't like people that have trucks. They don't like the concept of the patriarchy. They don't like toxic masculinity. They don't like anything that's, loud or abrasive. And they want all of that.
I find a tremendous irony in the people who like kind of talk this way, and they're like, and then one day we're gonna colonize Mars and smash the patriarchy. I'm like, wait till they hear what Mars represents. It's gonna be funny. Like they're finally gonna get to Mars, and like they have no idea that the planet, it just represents war and masculine energy, and it's just gonna drive people insane. There should be a funny kind of through line in the movie of like, all these sort of like super sort of amazing scientists go to Mars to colonize it, and then they're just driven to just sort of caveman, mad masculine energy and fight each other to death.
Well, what the
probably hopefully going to happen to Elon Musk.
Well, what the cure for that, though, of course, as they say, Mars needs women.
Yes, angry red women.
That was my take on guns. Magically, though, there's something, and there's something, there's something particularly for men. It's good to be you have to embrace, not to suddenly get all Tom of Finland or something, but it's like you have to. And I think that Crowley, or if you look at Crowley or Reich or Lacan, I did Reichian therapy for 4 years, so I really so I really got this. It's like you have to embrace a phallic stance. You have to be, it's as important for men, and that's something that I think people have forgotten. I think that's why they worship people like Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson or whatever. Not that that's necessarily a healthy, certainly not Jordan Peterson, a healthy representation, but
no.
Either for men, particularly male magicians, if you look at Crowley, you have to embrace a phallic stance. You have to embrace forward-directed will and intentionality and autonomy and force. You have to be able to embody it. You don't have to do it all the time, and you shouldn't do it all the time. It's not appropriate for all situations, but you have to be able to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, fire is is a masculine principle. You know, it's fire, it's phallic, it's an active principle of the universe versus a passive principle of a sort of chalice or a sort of feminine or a moon or water energy. It's like they're there. You got to have them both. You know, we need them both, and I think we're so desperate for understanding of sort of new formats of masculinity, where we call it the divine masculine, which there's almost no examples of. All everyone's told is that masculine energy is bad, masculine is bad, 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 but no one's told what the type of good masculinity is. And I think that masculine energy, whether it's being exhibited by a female or a male, is important, as important as female energy. And I think that we're in desperate need of sort of positive, I guess, masculine role models. And I do think that, like, what you're saying is why people end up sort of getting so drawn to Joe Rogan as this sort of like character that people are like, man, this guy's really figured it all out. And it's just like, I'm not sure that he has. Maybe he just read more books than you, and you just wanted to sort of listen to him talk about the books or something. I don't know. Not to shit on Joe Rogan. I don't listen to his podcast, but I do think it's a bit interesting phenomenon, and it's more speaks to the sensibilities of people really looking for new formats of masculinity. And I'm not sure what that are for people right now, but I think that's going to be something that is going to sort of define our needs in the future more.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that I wouldn't necessarily say it's just about masculinity. I just think that our culture is bereft of, I would say bereft of good role models, but I think that our culture is just fundamentally sick. And I don't think it has to do with one group or the other necessarily. It's like everyone is sick and anemic and lacking. And that's a spiritual lack in a lot of ways. But I will say that one of the things, even more than, because I like martial arts too, but I think that a lot, but I think even more than martial arts, there's something about the gun experience. I don't know what else to call it. If you go into it consciously, responsibly, I don't just mean like going to the gun range and popping off. I mean, like actually getting training from competent people. And there's not a whole lot of them, unfortunately. There's a lot of people training that should not be trainers. Who are just mall ninjas. I've met some of them, and they're ridiculous. You got to really be careful. Really be careful.
There's an abundance of them.
Yeah. Like, and you don't need to be credentialed. Anyone can say they're a gun trainer, right? And it's like, and I don't mean buying a gun and sticking it in your sock drawer, which is a foolish thing to do. I mean actually getting training from good people. There's something about that experience that just forces you to man up. I mean, it does. It's like you have this thing in your hand. It's like, this is the life or death. It's like this can take somebody's life or defend it. Or preserve life by defending you and your family from danger, and that forces you to become cognizant of that.
It forces you to become more disciplined. It forces you to become more aware. It forces you to become, even having this sort of proficiency with firearm. It's like you end up thinking that other people might have firearms too, which makes you more of a polite person sometimes. And it's a hard thing to explain. But going back to what you're saying, I always encourage people who are going to be first time gun owners to build their AR as well. Like, guy would from scratch, like, I'll come build it with you. You should learn how the whole thing works, because the idea that a gun is just sort of like, your cell phone, where you don't know how the fuck it works and you just go, hey, take it for granted. But your gun, you should know exactly how that sort of rudimentary sort of, system works, because it kind of is. It's a pipe with an exploding projectile in it at its core. And you should learn how that functions and be hyper aware of it, because it is very dangerous.
Maybe not as their very first gun experience, but as part of their process, definitely. I think it certainly field stripping and taking it apart all the way down to the basics and putting it back together. And the same goes with anything, Glock, whatever. Big part of it. I think particularly for the types of guys who like to build computers and things like that, it can be a real obsessive pursuit. Well,
it's like anything, building a go-kart and driving it is probably more fun than just driving a go-kart. You know what I mean? It's like there's a certain sense of accomplishment from when you're driving your own thing that you created. It's sort of ins and outs and how to tune it and tweak it. It becomes obsessive. Yes.
Well, maybe we should wrap up by we should talk about magic, because this is the Ultraculture podcast.
Sure. I mean, we tried to interweave it into our gun stuff, but
yeah. No, I know it's like it's so easy to get obsessive about. So you obviously are into magic, that you don't make any secret about that. And so I'm kind of curious. I guess I'm curious about three things, how you got into it, what your experience like has been with it, and how it's kind of evolved and interwoven with your stage, your stage persona, your musical career, things like
Yeah.
this, and kind of where you're at with it now and how you approach it. just those.
Yeah. Yeah, just that little quick one. Yeah, no, I think growing up, so my father is a holistic doctor, a Taoist. So I think having sort of like an understanding and awareness of sort of metaphysical energy and sort of bioenergetics from a young age definitely made me more magically inclined. Um, like I remember being hooked up to like, Kirlian photography electrodes to take pictures of my aura when I was a child. Do you know what I mean? In his second book, The Tao of Qi. Do you know what I mean? So like I was hyper aware of this stuff at a young age. And as I got older, starting to kind of connect more of the sort of dots of like where that fits into sort of the sort of Western esoteric tradition. Um, Combines sort of like some of his more Eastern philosophy and where that overlapped. I think a big moment for me was I did my university in Rome. I studied political science, and I used to hang out in Campo dei Fiori under this statue of Giordano Bruno, who, I remember talking to my
I've
history
been there.
professor.
I've been there.
I
I
was
know
like,
the
"Yo, who's
exact
that?"
one.
Yeah, I
I
was
know
like,
that statue.
yeah. I was like, "Who's this stat?" I was like, "Who's this statue of?" And he was like, "Oh, that's Giordano Bruno. He was burnt at the stake right there." And I remember thinking to myself, like, "For what?" Blah blah blah. Because I was like, I related to the statue because it kind of like looked like me as this dude with a hood and a mustache, and he just looked cool. And I was like that was my spot to vibe. I was wondering, I was so drawn to that. And then he explained to me that he was burned at the stake there, as he was deemed a heretic from the church because he was studying sort of these sort of hermetic arts and sort of Neoplatonism and all these things that was sort of like, I was like, what's this? And I just ended up diving down these rabbit holes in our library of finding all this new information about, I guess, some of the more, illustrious Renaissance magicians, if you will, which I just managed to capture my imagination so much because I think the way a lot of those two stories are told, whether it's people like Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa and these sort of you know uh, Western magicians, or John Dee and Edward Kelly, all these sort of characters that I was just like, this is wild. Like I was like, I wanted to know what was real and what wasn't, and I just ended up sort of becoming completely obsessed with it. And then met some interesting people in Rome, and ended up studying with some various orders. Never I chose to not initiate because I'm not really into frats in general. I'm more of like, this is me and my own path type of thing. But I guess the study never stopped. It's one of those things that when you're a student of the sort of magical experience and esoteric traditions, you just kind of you forever keep learning, which is I think why they call it a practice. When sometimes you're actually not practicing, you're actually maybe being more performative or executing, but it's still always a practice in one way or another. So for me, that was the abridged version of that. And then I just always kind of like at that point had incorporated into my creative work, because at one point I think that you just sort of become magic, and it's hard to separate the two. And I think that I have a very practical approach to my magic where I think some of it is just how to preserve the childlike curiosity in myself. And then some of it might be more about like, the art and science of, creating change and conformity with the will. Do you know what I mean? Like there's this sort of one really innocent, sort of playful, I think like children are magic, in pure innocent form, and I think that's sort of preserving that. And I think that's the fool versus the magician and the 0 and 1 card, and how we sort of oscillate between those two things. Because if you stay too much in the sort of, hyper aware magician, maybe you become a bit jaded and a bit callous. So you need to be able to oscillate back to the fool and sort of have that, a precocious, childlike sort of experience that allows you to sort of experience the wonderment of existence and nature and the world and all that stuff. That then you can go back and you can kind of run hard analysis on as a magician and kind of keep kind of, is our sequencing code, which I always found interesting. And that has in the tarot is the 0 and the 1, is the fool and the magician. So in many ways, we have to create our own binary codes for our own situations in this world. So for me, it was always that. and it's just been more refined as that. I think even with a band like 3TEETH, I didn't want it to be so overtly magical, which is why I called the band 3TEETH, when really that was just sort of a code for the trident, which, the trident is a sort of magical tool that can be traced back to even the god Marduk and the Enuma Elish of the ancient Sumerians. Marduk killed Tiamat, which was the chaos monster, to bring order into this world. And I've always been fascinated with the space between chaos and order, and that sort of struggle that the Germans call Chaos Kampf, that sort of eternal battle between those battleground between those two things. And I wanted 3TEETH to sort of be an homage to sort of this, divine weapon of the gods that sort of creates and destroys, which, as you can see here in my forum, is that trident, which literally just means 3 teeth. So, it's always there, but like in 3TEETH, you kind of have to peel back some layers to find it. Like, it's not like, some bands are just like throwing it right on your face and it's just like, hey, we are overused aesthetic of magic. But like, for me, I wanted it to be something that, if you didn't look for it, you wouldn't find it. But if you want to kind of go down the rabbit hole, I put a lot of pieces of popcorn to send you down there, So yeah,
Interesting.
that's my magical experience in the abridged version.
So where do you feel that you're at with it now?
I find myself sort of, like I've practiced ceremonial magic and ritual magic, but I don't find myself having the best results with stuff like that. To me, like I said, I'm more very practical with it in my approach to it, and sort of using, I guess, I hate to call it like media magic, but I think that, using sort of more like a technosis, if you will, which is also a great book, and sort of using it sort of magic in sort of the information age, I find where I have the best results with it in terms of whatever I'm trying to achieve, which is usually something, some sort of message or idea that, or some sort of code that I'm trying to break, or some sort of, like I said, psyop, where I'm trying to use guerrilla ontology and stuff like that to sort of, pull people out of their reality tunnels, which I often think that we could all use a little bit more of as they get, those walls build up pretty fast. And I feel like if we can kind of constantly get those pulled down a little bit, is when we can actually learn new things and expand our neuroplasticity in that respect, where we can sort of recondition and repattern, which I think we could just all use more of.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think now more than ever, I think it's really important not to get complacent. And I think the other thing is, it's really important, as I've learned, unfortunately, recently, don't assume where people are at, because people are, I think, more, that's what I was kind of hinting at earlier. I think people are more asleep in condition now than ever, more than the 90s
Yes.
or the 80s, maybe even more than the 50s now, in weird new ways that involve creating these designer reality tunnels for them. And so I think that for people who have been around for a while, it's like, now's not the time to get complacent. Now's the time to like dust off the tools and polish them up a little bit and get to work, I think.
I think there's an interesting point that Adam Curtis recently made in some of his new documentary series, where he was kind of talking about how radical culture was sort of a way to kind of create that complacency, where, as much as we like to think is radical culture sort of being like, but this is how we're gonna be radical, really all it's doing is letting enough steam out of the pot so the lid doesn't blow off. So it's like, that's why we're just like, everything feels so radical right now, but it's actually just a way to keep things more complacent, which is kind of a fucked up way to look at it, and oftentimes can feel really disheartening, because it's like, what are we supposed to do then? And I think that Adam Curtis explaining that in his new documentary series really kind of breaks down this sort of relationship between where we shifted from collectivism to just pure, utter, rampant individualism. And I think the individual, as these sort of units of one, is sort of why we're sort of where we're at, And he kind of explains that, like, going into the woods by yourself at night is much scarier than you go into the woods with a group of friends. It's fun. You're having a blast. You go in by yourself, it's a little scary. And this idea that, collectivism has really just completely died off, and everyone's so hyper individual. You have people marching in the streets like, not in my name, versus like, not in our name. Everything is so about the individual now that we are sort of atomized in that respect. We're sort of powerless. And sort of, that's why we have this sort of visionless future. And I think that you see these sort of upstarts of collectivism, whether it be, MAGA or Black Lives Matter. And that's where things start to get a little like, uprisey, and like maybe some change might be able to happen again. And I guess it begs the question. I'm not saying one is better than the other, because I think a lot of horrors have been done under collectivism. But I also think that we're sort of in a position where we have to really reconcile what it means to be living in a purely individualized, sort of atomized existence, where we are all sort of rendered powerless because it is so much individuality. People aren't joining political parties anymore at all. Do you know what I mean? It's like political parties no longer serve people, so we're not to blame. But political parties are serving corporate interest, global banking platforms, and
right, who are group,
who are collectivists. Exactly. So they serve those sort of so they serve these sort of political parties are sort of serving these unelective sort of collective bodies of these things that I just mentioned. So that's why they're just aligned for that, and then everyone else is just sort of left just being like, hey, I guess we're just going to sort of shout and do our sort of like radical art thing. But meanwhile, all that's doing is just letting us sort of punch ourselves out on the bag a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like no one's actually collectively unified in that respect.
I wish people realize that. I wish people realize that. I mean, that Guy Debord pointed that out in the Society of the Spectacle in the 60s. He said that, you can't, and we've seen it this year where it's like you can revolt and resist all you want, but the power structure will just absorb it and spit it back to you. And the next thing you know, it's like, Black Lives Matter logos on military bases. Or on Amazon.
Exactly. Next thing you know, Raytheon has the rainbow drone that they're killing kids in Yemen with, and you're like, wait, what the fuck?
Right, and it's not even a joke. It's like, so I think
no, it's not a joke. That's real.
So this makes me wonder. I've been wondering recently about this. This makes me wonder about Thelema a lot. It's like you look at Thelema and like this radical clarion call for the individual autonomy of the sovereign will. And it's like, well, what if that's actually the most, what if the call, which, you mentioned just do it. I mean, I think just do it is the real polemic word of the aeon, the real distillation of it.
Yeah.
But it's like, you look at that and it's like, where does it lead people? Where does the individualism go? It's like to hear where everyone's angry all the time and sick and lonely and,
and distrusting of each other. No one trusts anyone anymore. There's just just intense tribalism where like these tribal units are also atomized into sort of micro tribal units, and everyone's just like looking out for them and their 5 friends. You know what I mean? Like that's all, and their family. That's all anyone gives a shit about anymore. There's very much no sense of society anymore. And I think that because of that, we do have this total visionless future right now, which is it's sort of a sad time where everyone's just sort of feeling exhausted and beat up by it, which they just decided was like, hey, you know what? I'll just kind of like live for the next piece of dopamine, which is kind of sad.
This makes me, I would like to talk to Grant again about this, because he was talking about this in the 90s where he was saying it's like, the individual breaks down at its edges, and maybe Orwell and Huxley were wrong. Maybe we actually want to merge into this kind of Borg collective. Maybe the individual is not really that cool.
I think the pendulum will swing, and as it always does with everything, especially in politics. You know what I mean? Where it's like, we had these sort of collective things that defined our history up until this point, and then, like I said, we've sort of been atomized. And I think that moving forward, that I do think they're going to see these sort of resurgence of collectivism. I just fucking hope that it's not going to be a bunch of right-wing fascist insanity, which it kind of feels like it's about to be, which is even scarier,
Yeah, that is scary. And I don't know if you follow Chris Hedges at all, but
I do not.
Yeah, Chris Hedges is, he used to write for Truth Dig before it shut down, but, has been one of the best writers and voices on the left for a long time. But, I was watching something with him recently where he was saying that, speaking of taking back to the 80s and 90s, it's like the real fascist threat in America is Christianity, quote unquote Christianity. He's a Christian. He's like a Lutheran minister. So he sees Christianity in America. Mm-hmm. He's not anti-Christian. He sees Christianity in America as a heresy, like the kind of Joel Osteen prosperity church, like war for Israel, nonstop kind of insanity. And he thinks that, he made this very sobering point, which was like, Trump was just a dry run. Imagine he was incompetent. Whoever the Republicans get in next, imagine Mike Pompeo as president. is the point that he made.
Yeah.
That's really
I think I always worried about imagine if Trump was a gifted orator that was absolutely charming and wasn't just a total bag of meat on a stage. You know what I mean?
right.
It would be actually super scary. But the truth of the matter is, I'm not sure if Mike Pompeo gets it done, because there is something about you have to have. It was almost because Trump was so dumb and because he was such an outsider, it's I constantly try and figure out how Trump was elected. And I really just come down to the fact that I think people are so fucking sick of everything that we've been doing for so long that they were let's just give this guy a shot. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people who won't admit that they voted for Trump who ended up getting elected. I don't think it was Russians. I think that
absolutely
was
not.
silly sort of. Yeah.
I have a pretty prosaic or pretty basic version of why Trump was elected, which is if you look at the numbers on the 2016 election, less people voted for Trump than Mitt Romney. So the reason that Trump won was because nobody liked Hillary, but also the Democrats became so apathetic and complacent. And then what's her name, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, decided to stab Bernie in the back. So they basically divided their own party for Bernie, and then just Trump defaulted in. But less people. There wasn't this sudden upsurge of fascism. It's not that there's not fascism in America, but it never goes away. It's just that the Democratic Party got overconfident, I think, on that one.
That, it's also the Democratic Party, just Hillary Clinton isn't a bad person. She just has no ability to capture the imagination of anyone. Do you know what I mean?
He might be a bad person.
Say what you want about Trump, but I think he certainly. Yeah, he might be a bad person, but he certainly.
Hillary Clinton might be a bad person also.
He definitely. She's probably a bad person too. I think anyone that achieves any of that level of if you get up to that level, it's through draconian means. You know what I mean? But yes, I think
no
at the end of the day, the reason she couldn't win. Yeah, she couldn't win is because she couldn't capture anyone's imagination. She's fucking cardboard up there. You know what I mean? So. We're just so desperate for leadership in this country. And I don't mean necessarily presidential leadership. I just mean anyone that might have anything to say about anything.
I agree. And that's why No, and I think you made a point earlier, which I also very much agree with, which is that, maybe the fact that the presidency is no longer is just seen as a ridiculous institution. Maybe that's good. I mean, it's we've been evolving out of this, and we should be evolving out of this ridiculous need for tribal figureheads, at least at that scale. But we do have a leadership crisis. It's not really a masculinity crisis because it doesn't really have anything to do with gender. It's male or female or non-binary leaders. We need people who to step up and
someone to get up there and can actually make fucking sense. Someone who can actually make sense. There's just so few people that ever fucking get up there and say anything that I'm well, that makes sense. Everyone's just on some crazy shit lately.
Well, and if we don't do it, other people will, and it's we're now in such a dearth of leadership that people can get up and not make sense, Jordan Peterson, and people will be that's genius, just because they're not used to hearing people talk, for long periods of time, and it's kind of entertaining.
Absolutely.
So it's oratory, it's rhetoric.
I've been writing a song. There's a new song on our record called "The Merchant of the Void," and it sort of speaks about how, if you can't see your future, I'll sell one to you. If you can't find the meaning, I'll tell it to you. And it's just that, if people can't see a future, it's this is exactly what's going to happen, and it's continuing to happen right now with, Elon Musk, for example. That's the vision of our future right now, because he's going to sell it to everyone because there's no one else fucking doing it.
Well, I'm not anti-Elon. I actually quite like Elon, but I think that, but the overall point is, I agree with you on, and I think that, but that's true. That we don't even need to extrapolate that to a society-wide thing. I think just in one individual's life, even within your own life, if you it's what's the classic thing? If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Exactly. And I feel that's sort of where we're all at right now. We're sort of thirsty for meaning. We're thirsty for vision, and people are just going to gobble up wherever is the first thing that gets thrown in their face right now. And it's sad.
Yeah. Well, if you could, maybe just to wrap up, if you could pass on, if there's one little bit of magical wisdom, if you could pass on, If you could say something to everyone and just give one little insight, what would it be?
I mean, it would probably be really simple. I feel like if you're going to do something, be passionate. If whatever you're going to create, be passionate with it. I feel like there's a lot of music and art that's being created that sort of lacks a sense of passion. And I think it's so important to sort of, really, really have that intention and that care for what you're doing, and as opposed to just sort of putting something out there that sort of dilutes what art can be, because I do think it's incredibly important that we still have that. I think it gives, people those little glimmers of that vision and that meaning that sort of keep us alive for right now. So I think that, just be passionate about what you create, you know.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you very much. Where can people find out more about you, and where should we point them?
My Instagram is Alexis at Alexis Mincolla. That's Mincolla. Band is called 3TEETH, the number 3, and just teeth, no spaces. And I'm sure you can consult the Google Oracle and find out all the information that you may want or may not want.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. We should do it again sometime in the near future.
Definitely.
And I
Definitely.
don't know. Talk soon, buddy.
All right. Hope you really enjoyed that. Please meet me at magic.me, magick.me, the world's greatest school for magic, meditation, and mysticism. Meet me in the Adept Initiative course or in office hours where we do live one-on-ones. That could be you. You could be in the hot seat. Really looking forward to seeing you in class, and I will see you in the next episode. Please make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts. Subscribe to the new YouTube channel. It's just Jason Louv on YouTube. Get me on Instagram at magic.me. We got tons of content coming out. We got at least one podcast and long form YouTube coming out every week now. There's tons of new content. So make sure you follow us on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts, and I will see you at magic.me. All right, until next time.